Mike Pompeo with us right now. Of course, you know the name and the man, the former Secretary of State, kind enough to join us. Secretary, always good having you on. I know hope springs eternal, that you know you capture some of their bad guys. They're more inclined right now to negotiate to release some of our good guys. Never seems to materialize, though. There was even talk with Alexei Navalny when Vladimir Putin had said just days after his death, we were so close to a deal to get him out. I don't know who to believe. What about you?
Well, Neil, it's great to be with you. You know, these are very difficult situations. The hostage work was some of the most gut-wrenching personal work that I did as Secretary of State, and a little bit when I was CI director as well. You know, as for getting Evan out, there is only one thing. Director Panetta had one part of that right. There is only one thing that Vladimir Putin will release him for, and that is if he believes there's a real cost if he doesn't do so. And to date, apparently, there has been nothing offered to Vladimir Putin that will convince him to release Evan Gershkovich. As for capturing Russian spies, we should do that. We should do that regardless of whether they're holding someone in wrongful detainment in Russia. If there are Russian spies operating in the United States, for goodness sake, let's go get them. Not because we have someone being held in Russia, but because we need to get them off the streets. There's always trades that can be made. That's very dangerous. We saw that when we got back Brittany Griner. They just take more. They just stock the inventory, Neil. And so this is a question of power and President Biden's capacity to demonstrate cost. And to date, I've seen no evidence that this administration is prepared to impose a real cost on Vladimir Putin to get Evan home.
But, you know, this is the type of behavior, Secretary, you'd kind of expect out of a banana republic or a third world country. I mean, whatever you think of Russia, it is still a superpower. They're punching way under their weight. And I'm just wondering, do they have any concept of how that looks to the world?
Neil, they do, but they don't give a rip. This is a long tradition. This goes back. We heard Director Panetta talk about his time. It goes back. It predates that too. Right. We have frankly rewarded a lot of countries for taking Americans and holding them, and they find it lucrative. They find it of value. It's how they get a better position for themselves. And there's no domestic cost, obviously, for Vladimir Putin in doing so. And so here we find ourselves.
You know, I mentioned in the context also the Ukraine war. And we're 2 years into that, right, Secretary? And Vladimir Putin is personally the richest he's ever been. And oil revenues that were supposed to be sort of choked off are at a record high for Russia right now. And it's capitalizing off these higher energy prices. It just seems like upside down world.
Yeah, I think it truly is. Look, I think there's three big mistakes that have caused this to go on now 2 years and a handful of months. The first, obviously, was losing deterrence, not convincing Vladimir Putin there'd be a real cost for taking part of Ukraine. We were able to do it for 4 years. We lost it when we left office. Second, we've not held, again, this is much like the issue with Evan, we've not held anything that Vladimir Putin values at risk. When he knows that Ukrainian mothers are putting their children to bed at night, and feeling like they may not wake up. But Russian mothers in Moscow are putting their children to bed, and that's all good. There's no cost for Vladimir Putin. The final piece, and this is really the one you get to, the sanctions efforts that the administration began with, where Jake Sullivan came out and said, don't worry, it's just going to take a little bit of time, proved to be completely feckless. They didn't set oil embargoes. They didn't ban the product. They simply set a price cap. And the Russians have found a way to work around that. Sanctions are only of value, Neil, if you enforce them and you make them punitive. This administration chose to not do that because they didn't want gasoline at the pump in America to be expensive in an election year. That's a mistake. It certainly didn't achieve. These sanctions certainly have not achieved their objective. And in fact, you're right. They've made Vladimir Putin even more wealthy, and the Russian enterprise, arming their military, even easier for him.
Secretary, if I can switch gears here to Israel, I'm not even sure a delegation from Israel is coming here or not, whether this will be a video conference. Benjamin Netanyahu, of course, had scrapped the idea when we abstained from this vote that called for an immediate ceasefire. First time I believe that's ever happened. We are promising $3.8 billion on top of the $3.8 billion we give in aid to Israel every year, and some more aid and more arms coming to them. But it seems we're handling it gingerly. And then I'm reminded of Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland, who said about Israel, more aid, fewer war crimes. He was referring to their behavior in Gaza and saying that you got to be helping folks and not committing more war crimes. What did you think of that?
You know, I think in some ways Senator Schumer, Senator Holland have just lost the thread here. They've lost the focus. The focus is making sure that something like what happened on October 7th never happens again, and imposing real costs on the Iranian regime for having funded, trained, and facilitated what happened on October 7th. They seem so focused on their left wing of their own Democratic base, the sort of the pro-Hamas part of their party, instead of the defeat of Hamas and making sure that we don't have hundreds of human beings, now, Americans still held hostage, raped, tortured in the way they were on October 7th. I hear all the Democratic chatter today is about slowing down Israel, making sure Israel is behaving properly, when in fact the objective needs to be the defeat, the destruction of all of the entirety of the infrastructure of Hamas.
Do you get a sense, though, we've never done this, of course the UN vote thing was an unprecedented act as well, but we've never cut aid, or we might have in the past, you know history on this matter far better than I do, where if Israel wasn't towing a line that an administration had, there was always the inference maybe your aid will be cut or threatened. Do you think that's what's next?
I hope not. It wouldn't make any sense in the current context. Remember, the Israelis are fighting a common foe. They're fighting the Iranian regime. They're fighting a common foe not only of the United States and of Israel, but of the Gulf Arab states as well. They're the world's largest state sponsor of terror, and to deny resources for Israel to conduct a campaign that keeps Americans safer would be both pound foolish and silly and dangerous.
I'm just wondering, as we step back from this, and it's always a crazy world, you've written a great deal about it, as a CIA director, as Secretary of State, you've witnessed it and dealt with it and tried to improve it. It is what it is. But it seems like bad guys are winning a PR war, right? I mean, Hamas, it now looks like a sympathetic figure. China, that plays, in the eyes of many in the press, a statesman-like role in these crises. Russia, as I said, and Vladimir Putin getting the edge, and also having a significant improvement in their image in the eyes of the world. None of this makes sense, Secretary.
You know, I think I disagree with you. I don't think they're winning the PR war. I think they may be winning the propaganda campaign, and that may be influencing some across a broad spectrum of the West. Think of not only the United States and Europe, but of other democracies, places like South Korea and Japan. I think what this requires is doubling down on an understanding of who we are and the things that matter inside of our own nations. If we get it wrong here at home, if we don't teach our kids that this is indeed an exceptional nation, and that America is a force for good wherever it goes, it's not that we don't screw up from time to time, but we're out there trying to make life better for not only the American people, but for people all across the world. If we lose that thread in how we're educating our children, I think you may be right. It could be that the bad guys, the evildoers, win the narrative. And when you win that storyline, when you are viewed as the strong horse, bad things happen here at home.
Well, I certainly hope you're right, and I am horribly wrong. Secretary, it's always an honor to have you. Thank you for your service to the country. And
bless you. Have a happy Easter, Neil.
You too. Very good Easter at that. Mike Pompeo.